Okay, sorry about that. I had a bit of a muddle getting the PowerPoint up. So I'll just go over things very quickly. So today we're transitioning from the days of Apple to the days of Vine. And there's a little presentation about the Vine, Mead, and Mugwort. So to cut a long story short, a couple of days ago, I made a video for the Celtic gods of the vine, which you can look for on the YouTube channel. So I took these first few photographs I took today. We're quite lucky. First of all, there's this little vine growing outside in the courtyard of the farm where we are at Guernsey. And the astonishing thing is this vine was cut down last year accidentally by a gardener who thought it was a weed. It wasn't very tall, and it just got hacked down. And this year, without any watering or anything, it's grown. It's just come up from a dead stump. It's come up again. And that's quite interesting because that's outdoors. It's not in a greenhouse or anything. And although we're in Guernsey, the weather here, the climate, is about the same as Cornwall in Britain. So given the right sunspot and south-facing hill, you can grow grapevines in the British Isles, of course, and there is plenty of evidence that the vines were being grown in Ireland at least by the 7th and 8th century. And beforehand, they were trading for it in a big way. So I've covered all that in the video, The Celtic Gods of the Vine. Here's my vine stake, and it's actually made of vine wood, which is a very tricky wood to work with. But the vine behind it, I took this photo today, so much more luscious and vigorous vine because it's growing in a big greenhouse. And it's actually got some grapes are just beginning here. So I took this photograph just this afternoon. So that's how vine is looking here on the farm right now. Now, when my friends took on this farm 2 years ago now, there was a grapevine, but it had grown too big and it was damaging the greenhouse that it was in. It was actually breaking the greenhouse. So my friends made the choice of cutting it down, and I salvaged all of the wood from it. So there's a load of wood here. It's hard to tell by looking, but most of these pieces are about 2 inches thick. It's quite a big piece of vine. And as I was saying before, I had a problem with the recording. The problem with vine is it's such a moist plant that when it dries out, it splits. Here's some examples. So I've never known a piece of vine not split. It just is its nature because it's so wet that when the moisture goes, the fibers just separate from each other. So you can use it for arts and crafts, but you've got to wait for a long time, which makes it awkward for most people. It's not easy to make a 15-inch Ogham stake or anything. But once you've got a piece and it has dried out thoroughly and the splitting has finished, or the splitting it's going to do, then you can cut it up into pieces and use what's left. You could have small pieces of dry vine wood, but it's a real faff. And so it's understandable that it's not easy to get access to a grapevine. So a lot of people will substitute vine with blackberry because it grows everywhere. It's kind of a vine and it's got a very lovely fleshy fruit on it, and it's accessible. So coming then to today we transition from apple into vine, and it's the beginning of the third ACMA. So we're into the third quarter of the year, going from the summer solstice tree, apple. So just as much as the first ACMA begins after the winter solstice, the third ACMA begins after the summer solstice, you know. So from summer solstice and the days of apple, we've now got vine, ivy, broom, blackthorn, and elder. Elder holds the autumn equinox, and then we descend into the days of darkness, if you like, the darker half of the year. So we still got 5 trees in the light half of the year. You know, it's the later summer, and it's all about the fruiting time, you know. But I would argue that there's an esoteric intrigue there with the ancient mystery traditions, which I've touched on in the video about the Celtic gods of the vine. So this is on YouTube now. It's been there for a couple of days. I won't go into all of it. You can watch the video. But I think one of the main things with vine, as far as the Celts are concerned, certainly for the first centuries, like first, second, third, and fourth century, so like the Roman times and a little bit before, is it was a thing of trade. They didn't grow it themselves, but they traded for it, and that trading is really important. If you're trading with a culture, another tribe, or another country, then you're not fighting. You know, you've got friendships, you've got agreements, and so that wine is this thing of friendship and agreements and relaxing inhibitions and so on, you know. As those early cultures would have done their trading, they'd be talking, they'd be sharing ideas, they'd be talking about their knowledge. And if the Celts are buying lots of wine, which they were, we've got the archaeology to prove that, they'd be learning about the culture that was selling the wine and what the wine meant, you know. So with the Greeks, they'd know about the Greek god of the grapevine, Dionysus, you know. And according to Julius Caesar, the Celts used Greek as a trading language. You know, they refused to write things down, but they used the Greek language for trade. So that'd been well established long before the Romans conquered Gaul. But even when the Romans conquered Gaul, they had their wine god. You know, the Roman equivalent of Dionysus is Bacchus. So I talk about that in the other video. And then that leads up to, you know, throughout the Roman times, there'd be lots of wine drinking and the mystery traditions of Bacchus. And then when Rome fades away, you've got the beginning of Celtic Christianity, and Jesus refers to himself as the true vine, turns water into wine. And at every Eucharist, the people drink his blood as wine. You know, so the similarities with Jesus and Dionysus and Bacchus are fascinating, because there's a lot of stuff in the New Testament that is built upon ancient mystery traditions, pagan mystery traditions. Anyway, the point is that the Celtic Church and then the later Catholic Church, they needed wine. They needed wine for their Eucharist. You couldn't do their main observations without wine, you know. So from the 4th century and the 5th century onwards, wine was a big part of Irish culture because the Celtic Church was so big in Ireland. And there's even a story of St. Columba of Iona turning water into wine, you know, doing that because they needed it for their Eucharist and stuff. Anyway, coming back to the Ogham Grove, there is a Romano-British or Romano-Celtic god of the vine who fits perfectly with the Ogham Grove, and his name is Silvanus. And he's equated with lots of other gods, so he's often equated with Pan. And there was even a Celtic god in Yorkshire, northern Britain, called Vino Tonus. and vino as in wine. Vino tonus is a northern British god, and he was equated with Silvanus. Now Silvanus is always depicted holding grapes and apples, and in the Ogham Grove, apple and grape are right next to each other. So I've penciled it in this time of year as being Silvanus. Now Silvanus is also Pan. He's also the protector of the woods. He's Lord of the Woods. So you could call him the Hunter or Robin Goodfellow or Robin Hood. It doesn't matter. You know, he's the protector of the forests. And as much as following the winter solstice, the first tree is the birch tree and Ellen of the Ways, and the rising of the energy and the goddess of the sovereignty of the land. The polarity of that is following summer solstice. Here's the protector of the forests, the Lord of the Woods, gathering the fruits and the stuff. That they're almost a yin and yang, born of each of the solstices, if you like. You know, so he's the kind of polarity to Ellen. You know, quite interesting. But his main concern is the protection of forests, but also closer to home, closer to the Glastonbury area, there was a big temple on the River Severn that today the place is called Lydney. So it's known as the Lydney Park Temple. You can Google it. Lydney, Lydney Park Temple. And it was a temple complex, really. And the main god there, the Romans called Nodens, Nodens. Nodens was the god celebrated at Lydney Park. But he's equated with Silvanus and Poseidon and Neptune, because it's close to the River Severn. But so, you know, he's Nodens, but he's also Silvanus and the god of healing. Now, in Welsh mythology, Nodens is thought to be the Welsh god we call Neath, which is spelt N-U-D-D. And in Welsh, double D is pronounced like TH, and the U is like an E sound. So it looks like Nud, N-U-D-D. It's pronounced Neath. But he's the father of the Winter King in Glastonbury. The Winter King is called Gwyn, and his full title is Gwyn ap Neath, which means Gwyn, the son of Neath. You know, so this temple of Nodens up the River Severn is actually a temple of the winter hunters or Cernunnos's, the horned one, the antlered one. It's his father's temple, you know. And just as much as you've got the constellation of Orion beside the Milky Way, evidence suggests that Nodens or Neath is a name for the great river. Hence it's on the River Severn, and the great river in the sky is the Milky Way, of course, you know. So the interesting thing, I mean, it's not proven, but the idea that the realm of sleep and dreams is the land of Nod, you know, is also Nodens, is also Neath. It's the starry realm, it's the nighttime realm, you know, and it's the place you go when you're dreaming. Now, the interesting thing with the temple at Lydney is it had its main temple area, but it also had 3 rooms in a row. And the archaeologists believe that these were dream incubation rooms. So they were kind of rooms where people theoretically drank some sort of potion that was going to help them have some serious dreams, you know, and that the dreaming they did was part of the healing or part of the soul searching or shamanic vision quests, whatever you want to call it, but that seems to have been going on at the Temple of Nodens, and predominantly it's seen as a healing sanctuary, a healing temple. But they did dream incubations. It was really quite interesting. It sounds a bit like a sweat lodge or whatever. Curious. Now, the thing with Sylvanus is he's always depicted carrying apples and grapes. And I find that quite interesting, because even today we say an apple a day keeps the doctor away, i.e. it's a motif of healing. And it's so common that when someone's in hospital or they're sick, you take them a bunch of grapes. So it's like the fruits of the god of healing, Sylvanus, are the apples and the grapes, and is god of medicine, if you like. So this map is just to put things in perspective. You can see Lydney at the top, on the River Severn. The old name is Havren. Up the river from Caerleon. Caerleon is one of the towns that was sacred to Ellen of the Ways. It was one of the towns that were built for her. And where it says Sea Mills, Abona, that's roughly modern Bristol. Bristol's just slightly south. And Aqua Sulis, what we now call Bath, they found an inscription to the goddess Nematona, she of the sacred grove. So it's a really interesting area, north of Glastonbury, where you've got Gwyn ap Neath. You've got Nematona at Bath, you've got Ellen connected with Caerleon, and you've got Nodens, Neath, Sylvanus at Lydney. Suddenly the land starts to become alive, albeit we're looking through the veil of Romanized culture, but it allows us a glimpse of what was important to the Brythonic Celts. Right then, so the medicine of vine, where's my paper? So first of all, before we come to the obvious, the vine leaves themselves are edible, of course. And as a food, they're very high in iron, a really good source of iron. And most people are familiar with rice wrapped up in vine leaves, that kind of thing, but the vine is actually very good for you. The vine leaf is high in vitamins A, C, E, and K, and also very high in magnesium. So just the leaf of the vine is good medicine anyway, and it's anti-inflammatory as well. Most commonly, of course, the main thing is the grapes, and like I said, taking grapes to someone in hospital is a modern thing, and actually the grapes are packed with goodness, of course. So here's just a list. They boost the immune system, they prevent cancer, they lower blood pressure, they protect against heart disease, they reduce high cholesterol, they protect against diabetes, they help to maintain brain health, and they improve bone health. So they're all round powerhouses of well-being, the grapes, of course, Coming to the obvious then, I think with the trading that the Celts did, we know about the wine because of all the pottery, the amphora, but I think a thing that gets overlooked is the dried grapes, the raisins, the sultanas, the currants would have been just as desirable, because it allows you to turn bread into cakes, doesn't it? It turns savory into something sweet. And so that's just as desirable as the wine. It might not have all the mystery tradition lore, but certainly you can imagine tribal people loving having the dried fruit in their bread. So The wine, then, the medicine of the wine. And again, about moderation, of course, you can have too much of any medicine, but the recommended allowance for a glass of red wine has to be good red wine as well. Modern red wines have preservatives and things in them. So if you can, you want to get an organic red wine. And they recommend no more than 1 or 2 glasses a day. And so it's about moderation. But 1 or 2 glasses a day of an organic red wine is rich in antioxidants. It's proven to lower bad cholesterol. It's proven to keep the heart healthy. It can help to regulate blood sugar levels, and it's known to reduce the risk of cancer. So 1 or 2 glasses of a good quality red wine is a valid medicine. However, there's a warning, because too much is bad. You know, you can overdo it. You don't want to have 4 or 5 glasses of wine. So it's about respecting your medicines. You know, too much red wine on a regular basis can create liver disease, pancreatic disorder, can help develop cancer and disturb your sleep. You know, so respect your medicines, be moderate. It's quite interesting. You know, you can have too much of anything, of course. So be wise. Let's say the recommended allowance for an adult is 1 or 2 glasses, and that's it, of a good wine. So unlike all the other presentations we've done, there's no mushroom or fungus for the grapevine. I had a good look, and the only fungus mentioned is an undesirable, just a fungus that damages the grapevine. There was no kind of mushroom that was useful. So instead of mushroom, I went outside the box a little bit and thought about, I was thinking of wine, and I thought, well, what did the Celts have other than wine? And what they had, of course, was mead, you know, and they also made some sort of beer. There's a recipe, a famous recipe somewhere for heather ale, and it was a very desirable secret recipe. And of course, they had crab apples, so they could make some sort of cider. So even without trading for vine or wine, the Celts could make up some sort of alcohol if they wanted. And I think that's quite interesting for what I'm about to say. Now, there's a lot of Celtic lore about Mead, the sovereignty goddess of Ireland. For Tara is called Maeve, and it's related to the word mead, and it means that she's as sweet as mead, or it's she who intoxicates, you know. And of course, it's got that very significant relationship to the bees, and the bees are so important. And in the Ogham law with the willow tree and the bees and the, you know, the fertilizing of the fruit trees and so on, you know. So the bees became, or honey and the bees became symbolisms of the goddess of the land. You know, one of my favorite descriptions of the goddess is that she's the queen of every hive. It's just brilliant, you know. So just like Isis being, like all goddesses are Isis, but, you know, the fairy queen or the rose queen, she's the queen of every hive, you know. So that, again, that mead and honey thing. So coming back to medicine then, frustratingly, mead doesn't have a great deal of medicinal value. It does have 2 things. It's anti-inflammatory, and because of the honey, it's antibacterial. But I think its real value, especially in relationship to the third ACMA, is with the fruits of this time of year, with the blackthorn sloe berries and with the elderberries and so on, you really need the wisdom of the elders to know how to preserve things to last all year round. So you've got to dry the berries and keep them dry throughout the winter time, or you have to pickle things or make jams. It's difficult to make jams if you haven't got sugar. So alcohol is the way of preserving, so although mead doesn't have a lot within itself, it's the perfect carrier for tinctures. So you have your vessel of mead, you fill it up with sloe berries or elderberries or whatever, so the mead becomes much more than just the honey alcohol. It's actually the thing that's going to have the medicine of whatever you put in it that's going to preserve it throughout the year, and wine can be that too, so just like, I think it's whiskey based, isn't it? But Drambuie is full of herbs and spices, that would be too, that this is the base for all sorts of medicines. You put all sorts of herbs and dried fruits in there, and it's a tonic throughout the year. It's proper medicine, just like back flower remedies and tinctures and stuff. So I think it's quite important that the wine and the mead at the beginning of the third acma and the knowledge of preserving things. Okay, where's that? It's quite interesting reading through Nicholas Culpeper. A lot of his herbal medicines of the 1700s, he recommends adding to a glass of wine. So whatever it is, it's dried, it's powdered, and then it's added to a glass of wine. That's how this medicine is taken. So I think, going back way back in time, it would be the same with mead or beer or whatever. You're adding the herbs to an alcoholic liquid so that you can drink it, and somehow it helps and stuff. So finally then, mugwort. I chose mugwort as the flower of the moment, in this moment in time. Intuitively, really, I saw the variegated mugwort growing near our greenhouse, and I thought, oh, mugwort, we'll do mugwort. And it turns out that it has summer solstice lore, specifically one of its other names is St. John's plant, not to be confused with St. John's wort, so it's known as St. John's plant, and St. John the Baptist is summer solstice, of course, we touched on that with the days of apple. So it flowers and buds and flowers and everything at summertime. And it's interesting because it's one of those visionary plants, and you've got to grab them when you can, so yes, you can dry it and make it last, but this is the time between now and the end of July, if you like, for harvesting it and drying it. Just like Amanita muscaria, fly agaric mushroom, is late October, early November. You've only got that window in time to like I say, you've got to gather things, and how do you preserve them? You either dry it or you pickle it in alcohol or something or other, so it's one thing growing vegetables and fruit, it's another thing making it last, not through the winter, but making it last until next June, because there's no crops until the following June. You've got to make this stuff last a long time. I think it's one of the purposes of dolmens. I think they were kind of dry storage things as well as religious things. Very much the womb of the mother, of course. Another name for mugwort is the witch's herb. And like I said earlier on, I don't know if I recorded it or not, but there's a lot of folk magic lore to do with mugwort. according to various herb books, it relates to Artemis. Of course, it's called Artemisia vulgaris. So Artemis is the goddess of the moon, though Culpeper equates it with Venus. So some people see it as a Venus plant because it's good for things to do with Taurus and Libra, different parts of the body. But because it's Artemis, it's the moon, and specifically because it's the moon, it corresponds medicinally with women's issues. I was reading through various things. They're obviously written by men who are a bit shy about talking about things. So they say women's complaints or women's issues or whatever, you know. But corresponding with Artemis, Diana, and Hecate, I don't know how you pronounce it. I tend to say Hecate. And the Celtic equivalent would be Nematona, of course, you know. So it's certainly that would be its divine nature, the Mugwort. There's folklore of girls wearing garlands of it around their head at midsummer, again, summer solstice, midsummer celebrations with a midsummer solstice bonfire. And then after the celebrations, they cast the mugwort into the flames and stuff. So it has this relationship with summer solstice. Culpeper actually talks about it being helpful for women giving birth. However, almost all modern herbalists say that it is not to be taken by pregnant women. So that's a complete contradiction to what Culpeper says. In regards to women's issues or women's complaints, apparently it's best used for problems with menstruation and the menopause. So it helps, governed by the moon, it helps with all of that kind of lunar stuff within the woman's cycle and stuff. Makes things flow better, be more peaceful and all round. I haven't got the knowledge of that. You would need to talk to an old witch and get the insights from it, you know. So much was lost when the witches were burnt. So as a tea, mugwort can be purchased online. It's perfectly safe as a tea, with the thing that all things can be too much. You know, you don't want 10 mugs in one day sort of thing. But again, a little bit now and then. It's anti-anxiety. It's great for depression. It's antibacterial, so it helps with candida and problematic gut flora. Anti-inflammatory again. And mostly its lore is as a visionary herb, you know. So some people drink it half an hour before doing some clairvoyant work or divination work, you know, or half an hour before going to bed to try and get some lucid dreamings. And as we talked about earlier, some people will just stuff it into a pillow or an old sock and sleep with it by their pillow. And just the aroma brings on lucid dreamings. I've experienced that myself. It does. So I'm thinking then about the Temple of Lydney and the dreamings that were done there. And I'm sure that ancient people didn't just drink wine. I think that rituals and ceremonies, other things were put into the cauldron, you know, that were gonna, just like ayahuasca ceremonies, the Celts would have had their own equivalent. I'm not saying they did it every weekend as an entertainment. I'm talking about shamanic seriousness, you know, at special times and so on. So it's things like mugwort that could be added to the brew, you know. And the third Akma takes us to Virgo, which corresponds with Ceridwen and her cauldron of inspiration. And in her cauldron of inspiration, it's not a cauldron of medicine, it's a cauldron that's going to change the mentality of whoever drinks it. They're going to have their brain completely opened up to the Arwen, is what this brew is going to do. So it's interesting that even with the Bacchanalian ceremonies of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, they would, in the wine, they would also put vine leaves and ivy leaves into the mix along with whatever. And even ivy, not as a food, it's not to be eaten, but it can be chewed like chewing tobacco. And you don't want to swallow it, it's very bitter. But you chew it and the gums absorb the medicine or whatever, and it's slightly mind altering, maybe not as powerful as lots of other drugs, but the Bacchanalians added it to their wine. So the idea that the observation that vine and ivy are next to each other in the Ogham is very interesting. Just like apple and grapes being next to each other, suddenly you've got vine and ivy, the symbols of Bacchus, and that ivy takes you to Lunacy. And Lunacy is this sacred marriage with the Summer Queen, and she's Broom, and the constellation of the Summer Queen is what we call Crater, the wine mixing cup. So it's a specific constellation that's wrapped up with the ancient mystery traditions, and it's this wine mixing cup. I would argue, and it stands up quite well, that in the Celtic stories it's the cauldron, it's Ceridwen's cauldron, it's the cauldron of Annuin, and it corresponds with your middle cauldron because it's all to do with the constellation of Leo, and Leo governs the heart. So it's the cauldron of the star sign that governs the heart, which is the middle cauldron, and in the heavens is Crater, the wine mixing cup. So the third Acma begins with wine and then is followed by ivy, which is mind altering. And that Lunacy, there's this summer bride with this cauldron that is a wine mixing cauldron, and that then leads you into Virgo and Ceridwen's cauldron that's going to open the brain up to Arwen, inspiration, and so on. So it seems quite clear to me that that's the story, if you like, and we'll investigate it as the weeks go by. So like the first Acma is Brigid, goddess of inspiration, and Imbolc, and the nine muses and cauldron of inspiration. It's all directly opposite Virgo. The second Acma is sovereignty, marriage, the young hero proving himself to be worthy of the Summer Queen. May Queen becomes a Summer Queen, and so on. And then the third Acma has two things. It's going to lead to Lunacy, which is this marriage, because 9 months afterwards is the birth at Beltane. Ceridwen consumes Taliesin at Lunacy because he's born 9 months later at Beltane. So that suggests that the Welsh bardic mystery tradition used Taliesin as a rite of passage that led to Beltane. So all those things would be played out from this Acma and from a specific moment in time, which is the cusp between Leo and Virgo, which is the beginning of the descent into the mysteries and so on. So so there's this sacred marriage ceremony with the it's Lunacy, marrying the Summer Queen. It's also the initiates getting ready to descend into the mysteries, and then at the end of the triple goddess, the elder tree, you've passed autumn equinox, and then you're into the wild heath, the wild hunt, winter solstice, and then rising back up through the water's edge and the salmon's leap. That's the kind of story with the bardic traditions that are being played out. So there you go. This is the beginning of the third ACMA, the fruiting time. And I'll stop sharing and you can put your microphones back on and we can talk about those ideas.
Yeah, so Yuri, that was very interesting because I hadn't really realised, because in the two places that I've lived in Glastonbury, in the gardens are always apple trees and wild vine.
Brilliant, wonderful.
And the first garden, the vine had basically broke the greenhouse to get out, didn't always get fruit. But the garden I'm in now, we have purple and black grapes. And I now have to go out and trim back the leaves so they get the sun. So I hadn't really clocked that Sylvanus had the grapes and the apples, but there was that link between Nud and Gwyn ap Neath, his link to the tour.
And it's contentious with some people, of course, but there's lots of YouTube clips about it now that, there's lots of evidence that the Jesus story in the New Testament has so many parallels with ancient pagan mystery traditions, characters like Dionysus, Osiris, Bacchus, and so on, that it's theoretical. But the early Celtic Christians of like the 4th century and the 5th century might have been much more Gnostic than Catholic. And the difference is that Gnosticism is about Arwen, it's about making a connection with your own divine nature and learning about your eternal self and stuff, and understanding that Jesus is a figurehead of a mystery tradition like any other. But with Catholicism that took over in the 600s, it became this corporate power thing, and the Celtic Church got pushed aside, and the Jesus story became literal history rather than a mystery figure and stuff, So I think when you're going through Celtic history through the centuries and into the medieval stories, there's a lot of lore that's hidden because it's heretical to the Catholic Church, so it's wrapped up and concealed in different ways. There's a Celtic god in Gaul called Sucellis, and his two main attributes is he has a great big long hammer and he carries a vessel in his hand. Well, it's the same symbols that Dagda has. Dagda has a great big club, too big to carry, and he has his cauldron. So I'm not saying that Dagda is Sucellis, the wine god, but they obviously have a similarity. There's commonality between them, and of course Dagda's cauldron is the cauldron of plenty and all the rest of it and stuff. It's the prototype theoretically of the medieval Grail stories.
Jumping around a little, I just wanted to mention as medicine, one of the things I make every few years, and I'm lucky to live in wine country, so there's an organic vineyard near me, and I help them clean out one of their tanks, let's just say, and there's seeds and skins. So you've got the red wine, seeds and skins after all of the wine has been poured off and beginning to ferment, and those are just filled with nutrients. There's a product called resveratrol, which people buy in the natural medicine lore, that's really good for your heart and your circulation and all that. And you can make your own with the seeds and skins of the grape. It's called the must, I believe, the leftovers from the grape, the winemaking. And I just put it in alcohol, very strong alcohol, and leave it for as long as I want. And and I noticed that I get grape seed oil will float to the surface if the grape seeds have been cracked open. So there's a little tiny layer of oil at the top, which is grape seed oil, which, as we know, is also sold in the natural products industry. So That's just another thing. Alcohol upon alcohol, but basically using a very strong, much stronger than wine alcohol, you get this other product.
Are you speaking of something like Everclear?
Yes, Everclear or pharmaceutical grade alcohol. I actually take it down to about 80% from the 95% that it is when you buy it. But if you use 95% and you shock the seeds, you'll get that quite a bit of that oil pretty immediately. If that's what you want. But it's not enough to like use. It's just kind of an interesting pharmaceutical chemistry.
Yes. Thank you for that.
This is dangerous territory for me because I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for a little over 40 years. And I used to have a good time with wine. I used to drink Everclear. But I mean, that was a long time ago. So it's 40 years. I'm an addict. An alcoholic, but I'm wondering what
is Everclear?
What? Everclear. It's pure grain alcohol. It's just pure grain alcohol. It's the worst stuff in the world.
Right.
Yes.
Except for if you want to use it for things like that. But I could never have a bottle of Everclear in my house. But anyway, I'm wondering how does all of this, I mean, addiction, you were talking about, that too much medicine can hurt you. Well, yeah, it can create alcoholism. And I'm wondering how that relates to all of this, because it's definitely a part of the vine. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
congratulations.
Are there any
40 years?
It's interesting. A story that sticks in my head is the story of Midas, who wanted whatever he touched to turn to gold. That story. And on the one hand, you hear that Bacchus and the Bacchanalians were wild orgies and everyone's out of control. However, it was Bacchus that granted that wish to Midas. He was teaching him moderation and to be balanced and stuff. So, it's easy to, I wouldn't say abuse alcohol. The trouble with alcohol is it's so bloody addictive. It did my dad in. That's the bottom line. My dad ended up in his 70s drinking 1.5 liters of whiskey every night.
Wow.
And I'm
it's
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, he had various arthritic pains and bad hip, and he said it dulled the pain, but it's the addiction as well, of course.
Yeah.
So
for a while,
moderation is the key. My mother died of cirrhosis of the liver.
So if you've already had issues with alcohol and you're a recovering alcoholic, then you've got to stay away from it. But you can still get the health benefits, a lot of them from grape juice. Doesn't have to be alcohol.
Right.
That's it.
Make jelly.
Right.
And drinking teas and just eating the grapes. So, and maybe you don't want to preserve things in alcohol, so you're going to preserve things in brine, salty water, and oil and stuff. Yeah.
Or making jelly, Amy.
Yeah. And you can use vinegar, Amy. You can use vinegar too. You're not going to want to take much of it. Tablespoon of vinegar is a lot, but salad dressings with herbs in them, and certainly mugwort would be an interesting attempt at a nighttime.
Yeah.
I'm trying to reverse.
That's going to be fun.
I'm trying to reverse type 2 diabetes, so I can't have the jellies. There's just too much sugar in them, so my diet has to be savory more than sweet, Yeah.
I'm also wondering, this is a stretch, so bear with me, okay? But you say that vine doesn't have a mushroom, and I'm wondering if psilocybin could be considered a mushroom that corresponds with vine.
Okay,
I
You
like
know,
that.
I
I'm just-
don't know what time of year is the time for gathering psilocybin, other than you could dry
I
it,
don't either.
make it last all year. But I think that's the big thing of this ACMA, is all about how to preserve things and make them last the whole year.
Right.
Very,
Well, and we,
Britain is a very damp country, you know, so that's why I was saying like caves and dolmens being dry storage, because things are going to go damp and moldy in the winter time. So you can dry agaric mushroom, but how do you keep it dry? You know, difficult.
well, and
Well,
the
psilocybin just
black
became
pumpkin?
legal in Colorado to
Really?
grow, and yeah, it's everybody's excited about that. But yeah, and I mean, you guys probably know that there's a lot of studies going on about the use of psilocybin, as well as some other drugs that I don't agree with, like ketamine, which is so dangerous. Anyway, psilocybin being used in psychotherapy to treat depression and chronic pain. Tricky, but interesting.
A lot of mushrooms are very good for the brain and help to restore brain cells and synapses and stuff.
Oh, yes.
It's a
I
common.
think they ought to use MDMA for mental health.
I used to abuse that in high school, man. MDA, it was before MDMA. It was pure MDA, and it was really
Right.
something. I can't get around that stuff, you know, for treatment, because I know I'll go right down the rabbit hole.
It was fun while it lasted before they changed the compound.
It was real fun. While I was talking to trees, boy, it was
Yeah.
great.
I had trees
That
that
was a
looked
long
like
time ago.
broccoli.
Yeah. I
Oh.
had trees applauding me after I would go on about something very interesting.
Also, I have a background. I drank too much alcohol in my 20s. I had the shakes in the morning, that kind of stuff. I hardly drink now, hardly at all. But I do have a background in psychic research, what we call psychic questing. And I actually,
Yes.
you know, with practice, everyone can be clairvoyant and visionary, completely sober.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's some traditions are using intoxicants and hallucinogens to almost kickstart people that aren't very psychic, you know, and because it gives you an immediate key to the door. Whereas the right lifestyle, it can be developed slowly in a very sober way that isn't risky to your health and sanity.
Well, yeah, and in because I remember in my 20s reading one of the yoga books where it said, you know, no alcohol, don't really eat meat, sort of coffee and all of that, and thinking, oh, I'm not going to do that. Like the alcohol and whatever. But the more that I've gone into the yoga practices, into the breathing, the two things stand out. The desire for it melts away. And as Yuri says, through different states of meditation, engaging with your breath and with sound, you then suddenly find that actually all of those open up, and you don't have the desire for any of those things, because the two things don't really go together. Once you really get into it. So, and I didn't have to make the, you know, having thought about, well, I'm not going to sort of give those things up. They fell away as I went further into the yoga practice without actually any effort. Yeah.
I think when you start being clairvoyant or psychic on a regular basis, you want less noise in your head. You know, you become too sensitive to external influences and things. You know, really you're looking for a peaceful landscape in your brain.
Not that busyness.
Yeah. Because you can see too much too soon as well, you know, so there's very close to wisdom and insights is insanity, isn't it? You know, it's finding that
Oh
balance.
boy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
difficult and different for everybody.
Yeah, and it's difficult because I love altered states. You know, I just love altered states. So finding a way to achieve, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in traditional Native American sweat lodges, only with traditional Native Americans over here. And, you know, that's a wonderful altered state. But I don't do it as much anymore because of certain eye problems. But, you know, I love altered states. I'm really tempted to try psilocybin again after 40 years as a way of treating depression. I'm tempted. I haven't taken that step, but I'm tempted to do it because I love altered states. And the only other way I've found altered states in sobriety, good, true altered states, as I consider them, is through holotropic breath work and sound baths, sound healing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Getting
trance dance.
acupuncture, you can, I end up in an altered state every time I have an acupuncture treatment. I go into a super transcendence, and I really don't want to get off the table, and just could be there. And I have fallen into sleep from there to an incredible long dreaming
Lucid sleep.
psychic realm after an acupuncture treatment.
And with
Right.
the psilocybins, because some years ago we went looking for them in the hills with some friends, and they rushed ahead, couldn't find any. I was going quite slowly, just sort of connecting in with the earth and whatever. Came across one, held it in my, picked it, and all I had to do was hold it in my hand, and I could hear them, this sound coming. And then whenever I walked past one or near to one, it was like suddenly this whole thing came, and because I was the driver, I couldn't actually. I was the only one who found anything. But actually, all I had to do was I went very slowly, and they said, "What are you doing? Hurry up!" You know, and I was going off into a dream. But all I had to do was hold one in my hand and tune into that, and suddenly the whole sort of that mushroom world was there communicating with me. I didn't even have to take it.
Oh yes, we used to make mushroom tea.
Yes.
So you can dry. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt. On you.
No, I finished.
You're reminding me of talking about microdosing. The dried psilocybin, approximately 100 milligrams, and I only use 60, is a microdose. And you don't get the any kind of psychoactive properties, but it does really, really lift your mood and even depression, and you just feel normal. You don't have any
You're
sparkle.
in California.
Yeah, I'm in California.
Is that you talking about psilocybin?
Yeah, psilocybin dried, less than 100 milligrams. Some people can take 120. I just take 60. And it's not as amazing as what Talia's story is of kind of homeopathically tuning into the plant spirit, but it is a physical opportunity, and you don't feel any kind of high at all. You can do normal stuff. You can drive, you can work, you can be involved in your entire day's activities. I did a nice microdose yesterday, and it lifted me up from having read about the world problems in the morning. Don't do that, or take your microdose and get over it. But so I do it once in a while. They say a few times a week is very good for a microdose, and there are books out now and YouTubes. Jim Fadiman.
That's not much.
Huh?
It's legal there?
It is legal in Berkeley.
See,
in Oregon, and we're starting to be surrounded by legal.
In Berkeley. Yay, Berkeley.
Yeah.
We must
love Berkeley.
Get our meditation done.
Yes.
Sorry.
Turn your microphones off and I'll stop recording.